Another writing exercise you can do is where you write down a name or a few names and then write down everything that you think about that name. Describe as much about that person as you can think of. How they look, how they act, what mood they're usually in, how they treat others. You know, are they, do they laugh easily? Are they easily upset? Do they keep to themselves? You know, just anything that you can think of that is attributed to that name. Keep in mind that names are in danger of seeming passe. If there's a name that might, you know, names like fashion go in and out of style, and the thing that I find funny, names that I thought were dumb when I was little, I now think, you know, like Frida and Sydney. Those were old-fashioned dumb names when I was a kid, and when I think of them now, those are really great names. So do keep in mind that, you know, there might be a name that you think of that you just think is like, you know, really cutting edge, and those are the names that are most likely to be passe later this week, if not within a year. If you're working on a story like say that takes place far in the future or in a completely different universe, or a story where you're not using any names that people know now, so they're 100% fictional, I would suggest that you would at least look at some things that are common in the names we use that you can apply to creating names in your story. There are a lot of last names that actually, you know, are like Fisher, Shoemaker, you know, my last name Porter. You know, these are names for occupations, and you know, then if you like look at native names, they are like attributed to things in the natural surroundings, and so those are some things about names that you can apply to, you know, Martians from another planet. You can still think, well, they might. Well, I was working on one story that took place about 1,000 years in the future, so a last name that I came up with was sort of like the future of our now, you know. You know, so if you look at a last name like Shoemaker, and you kind of imagine, well, the history of that, you know, it's implicit in the name. Well, the fictional name I came up with was Data Tree, so you could see how that would be a name that might have generated in our time that would then exist as one of those names who had lost their original meaning in the distant future. One thing I try to keep in mind is, like in most forms of art, writing, and illustration, downplaying it often can make the work even stronger. And with names, choosing names that you know, like might be a little bit more ordinary in the long run can have more impact. On the other hand, look at like a lot of actors who change their names, will come up with names that are very unusual, but in a very short period of time, people don't even think of them as unusual anymore. So keep in mind that if you come up with a name that is just very strange, the audience will soon not think of it as strange anymore. And so you might be able to come up with a very effective name that is not going to stand out, might at first read, might, the reader might, wonder about just how, notice how unusual it is, and after that, not think of it as unusual. Sometimes it's helpful to try to think of names that you think wouldn't work, that would be really, far away from who you want the character to be. But after you try them out, you realize that they could work really well. Like, what do you think of the name Earnest? I mean, doesn't it sound like a really hokey name, Earnest? Doesn't that sound just like really totally hokey? But then you think of Ernest Hemingway. So there are times when it's helpful to really try to get far away from your own expectations and try names that are very far away from what your first choices would be. So choosing a name is where the creativity comes into play. You're not trying to choose the right name, but recognizing that the different names you're considering have different possibilities, and they could be effective for vastly different reasons. One name may really describe the heritage of the person. Another name might be so outlandish as to set your character apart from all other characters. You could introduce your character only by a nickname they're called by. The possibilities are just really endless, and when you are writing with a creative spirit, you can just entertain different names for your character and become aware of why those different names are going to be effective in your story. Just be willing to ask yourself if the name is effective or not, if it's doing for you what you would like it to do. If you do want a name, if you want a character that in some way is way out there, and you want to choose a name that reflects that character is way out there, recognize that, like if the name choice is like Lightning Bolt, because the character is way out there, actually, to the reader, a name like Lightning Bolt is not way out there. It ends up being counter effective. But if you choose a name that is gonna like really surprise the reader, then that name will be appropriate for a character who is way out there. The name you choose should also be rooted in that character. It should work with who you want that character to be. If the character comes from a stable family, then you want it to most likely be a name that the character was given by his or her parents. On the other hand, say that you're doing a character who's homeless, and often in kind of the subculture of homeless people, they go by names that they may have given themselves, or like at one time I knew a homeless man who everyone knew him as Turtle, and this was an old drunkard who would just stumble around, could barely stay coherent throughout the day, and everyone knew him as Turtle. And that name, I didn't know him by any other name, and I don't think anyone else did. And that name is rooted, it makes sense for who he is, whereas if you have an accountant, it would seem incongruent for an accountant to go by the name Turtle. So, you know, just look at the name and make sure that it fits in with where that character comes from and makes sense for their reality. In choosing a name, keep in mind that that for some characters, you want some characters to kind of fade into the background of the attention that your audience gives them, and you want other characters to stand out, and you want to draw the attention of your audience to certain characters, and you can use interesting, unusual, and surprising names to draw attention to the characters you want your audience to pay attention to. Another writing exercise you might want to do is watch a film and write down 3 of the names of characters in that film, and then go back and write for each one why the scriptwriter, novelist, story creator, producer chose those names. Someone thought creatively about each of those names, and if you deconstruct it, you can learn a lot about options you have. The more meaning a name has, and the more fitting a name is to a fictional character, the more impact that name has. If you want names that have, you know, like great impact on the reader, look for the meaning, and look for the history of the name, and look for the demographics of the name, and look at how that name reflects the kind of role that character plays in life. Keep in mind that first impressions apply to your fictional characters, so when a character first shows up in your story, that's going to be a first impression, and names are usually part of a first impression. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope you have some good writing. The reason I make these video tutorials is to get the word out about my own storytelling my own storytelling film at solomation.com, so please return the favor and check out one of my videos, and have a good day.